What's up, guys? Coach Jared here with the Unfair Advantage podcast. Today's guest is a guest that I was supposed to have on a couple weeks ago, but he lost his voice at the Arnold, so we're just going to do this thing virtually. This is my good buddy Trevor Kim. He's a two-time national champ, right?
Yep.
Um, in the 96 and 102, right?
Yeah. So I won 96 in 2022 and then was tired of cutting, so went up to 102 and then won that in 23.
Yeah. So two-time national champ, Olympic weightlifter. We actually both, I think, started probably around the same time because I had met you or at least seen you at the Arnold in 2017. Was that about when you started?
Yeah, my first meet was 2016. So I started
Same.
kind of training in 2015. First meet was 2016.
Okay. Yeah. So we started about the same time. He's just had a lot better longevity in the sport than I have. So, um, yeah. What are your best lifts, by the way?
162 snatch, 187 clean and jerk. I've cleaned 95, jerked 201, squatted and pulled 273.
Squatted and pulled the same number?
Yeah, so I have to squat. I have to train squatting a significantly more amount than like I have to squat so hard to get to that number. But deadlifts, I can just kind of like do it.
So you just, if you squatted, you're like, I'm going to go try to pull it, and you can.
Yeah, like the day after we competed at the Arnold, I deadlifted 273 in the training hall with Brandon Victorian. Just like
Nice.
he was like, "Hey, we're about to deadlift. Do you want to join in?" I was like, "Sure, let's do it." And pulled 273.
And that's your PR.
I've done 275, I
So
think.
about the same. Okay.
Yeah, same thing.
And then you played college baseball, right?
Yes. I played
Yeah.
at
So
a
go
small
ahead.
D3 school.
Yeah, but you gotta think a lot of the people that are gonna listen to this are like we train a lot of youth athletes, so we might
Okay.
have some of them listening to this. So I kind of want to go through, your background with baseball or other sports maybe that you played growing up, and then how you kind of transitioned from that to weightlifting. So if you don't mind, take us back to like grade school whenever you started playing sports.
For sure. So I'm from Indiana, and Indiana's a basketball state. So I grew up playing basketball and baseball. Did that all the way through high school. I stopped playing basketball my junior year of high school was my last year. Um, and then, or sorry, my sophomore year was my last year. Junior year was the first year that I only focused on baseball. And then played college baseball, and then played in a league called the Prospect League, which is like a wood bat summer league for like it's supposed to be more advanced college players. Like I was the only D3 guy on my team. The rest of them were from Ohio State and Ole Miss and Mississippi State and a bunch of big D1 guys and then little D3 guy playing shortstop hitting third. Um,
That's pretty cool.
and I also did some gymnastics like as a youth, like till I was like 6 or 7. And then my dad was a Division 1 diver, so I was forced to dive like kind of early on too. So I would imagine some of my athleticism comes from gymnastics and diving, and then just training for baseball for since I was, 14. Kind of gave me a pretty big strength base before starting weightlifting.
I did not know that you did gymnastics and diving. I
Yeah,
mean, I feel like I'm probably fairly close to having kids someday, and I didn't do gymnastics or anything like that, but I feel like that's especially from the mobility thing
for
aspect,
sure.
is which is what I need. Do you feel like that translated a lot? Like later on, you didn't have to work on your mobility as much, or?
I wouldn't necessarily say that because it was when I was so young.
Hmm.
I didn't really continue any of that through high school. When I started weightlifting, I couldn't do like a body weight squat without shoes on. Like couldn't sit in the bottom of a squat without weightlifting shoes on. So I definitely had to work on my weightlifting specific mobility when I started because snatching and clean and jerking, I still kind of have a bad front rack, but um, that's due to a couple injuries for the most part. But yeah, I think the gymnastics and diving really helped just from like a general athleticism and proprioceptive awareness standpoint. But
Hmm.
um, if and when we have kids, I'll for sure be putting them in gymnastics when they're you know, two, three, four, whenever they, whenever we feel like is a good time for them to start.
Right. So when did you officially like, hey, I'm done playing baseball? And when you were done with that, did you go straight to weightlifting or was there kind of some time between?
There was a little bit of time between. I stopped playing when I didn't get drafted. I was kind of expecting to play professional baseball, and when that didn't happen, I mean, and that's kind of wild to expect from somebody coming from a D3 school, but I would like to say that I was above average at baseball, um, and had a pretty good college career. And I had talked to some teams, and so there was like a little bit of like I was on a couple teams' radars a little bit, but I would have been like a 35 to 40 round pick. Nothing. I would have been
Hmm.
basically paying to go play, which I would have totally done, to be quite
Yeah.
honest. But so once I didn't get drafted, I spent that summer doing a bunch of tryouts for teams to try to just get picked up. And then after I got done with, like, after none of those worked out, I started just doing normal strength training at a college gym in my hometown. And then my first job, I worked at a physical therapy clinic, and
Mm.
the clinic director was into CrossFit. He now owns a CrossFit gym, but he was like coaching CrossFit, and he knew I trained. And he was like, "Hey, why don't you come try do some snatches with me?" And I was like, "Okay." And I ended up snatching. The first time I ever snatched, I snatched 195 pounds for whatever complex they were doing.
No
And he was
shit.
like, yeah. And he was
That's
like,
crazy.
but he beat me because he did 225. And I was like, this is annoying that this old bald guy just beat me in snatching. And I know I'm stronger than him. So he was like, hey, you should probably just try to train this. And then 2 weeks later, I snatched 225. So that came pretty
That's
quickly.
crazy. I
Yeah.
think
I
I
mean,
made really fast progress, but I think that's the fastest I've ever heard.
other than
Outside of like
Colby or,
Aaron Williams. Yeah, exactly.
yeah,
Exactly.
outside of those
Well,
guys,
they kind of don't count, but that's pretty quick.
I agree.
That's pretty crazy. So what when you were in high school, you said you did do some sort of strength training for baseball. What did
For
that look
sure.
like? Was it like not that good?
No, it was your typical bro
Hmm.
gym lifting. Like our high school strength coach was a former bodybuilder, so most of the workouts looked like what a normal bodybuilding style workout would be, five
Hmm.
by five bench press. And I didn't really do a whole lot of squatting in high school, to be honest, because I broke my back in a few places. Um, so I was
I didn't know
terrified
that
of
either.
squatting, and
How'd you
squatting's
do that?
hard. So playing baseball, I slid in and hit a guy's leg, um, like with my head, and I kind of scorpioned, if you know what that
Oh,
looks like, where your
yeah.
feet kind of come over. Um, and I fractured four transverse processes in my back. And they didn't really do anything to, like, it was non-surgical. There was nothing to do to fix it besides really rest and just kind of let the fractures heal. But that was a good excuse for me not to squat in strength
Hmm.
class. And so it was really like bench press, biceps, abs, you know, typical high school boy workouts.
Yeah, that's what I mean. When I was going to school, I played baseball, but I put my sport was mainly basketball, and I played basketball, baseball, and golf. But like, dude, I mean, especially on the basketball side of things, like training was not really like strength training specifically was really not a thing. Like it was like, oh, you don't want to get bulky,
Abs.
like yeah, like
That was
I
like
mean,
the only thing I trained for basketball was the calf
dude,
raise machine.
I weighed 142 pounds my senior year of high school.
We were
142
honestly
pounds.
not too far off.
Really?
I graduated at 155.
It's just crazy that like we have access to like all this knowledge now. When we were
Yeah.
growing up, dude, and it sounds like we're acting like we're super old, but it's like, dude, seriously, there was like it was like taboo to strength train as a basketball player.
Yeah, I mean, same for us. Like for baseball, it was like, all right, well, why are you bench pressing? Bench pressing's terrible for baseball players. I'm like, is it really? Like
Exactly.
the three best bench pressers on our team also throw the hardest. So, I
Weird.
mean, that could just be like a genetic thing, but it's not hurting us. So I'm gonna keep doing it.
That's still a thing. I think there's still a lot of people out there that think you're
Which is
gonna
so
die.
strange. Like the main adductor of your arm is your chest. Why would you not make the thing that starts the throwing motion with your shoulder strong? I don't know. Doesn't make sense to me, but
Well, there's like oh, you're gonna get, the other thing is like you lose all this mobility if you bench press, right? Like your shoulder mobility is just gonna disappear, right?
yeah,
It's
if you're
like,
trying to
okay.
bench like a power lifter and if you want your 6'4", 170-pound left-handed starting pitcher benching 400, yeah, he's going to lose some mobility, but odds of that happening are slim anyway. It's like the
Yeah, exactly.
genetics that make, yeah,
We're only training it so much, right? And
yeah,
you're also doing all these other things. My biggest thing with any movement that you think is going to make you immobile is, are you still playing your sport regularly? If so, you're probably not going to lose the ability to go through those ranges of motion, right? If your sport is throwing a baseball, or let's say sitting in a catcher stance, like in if you're doing that regularly, you're probably going to be fine.
yeah, your brain is too smart to let you lose the mobility that you need every day. It's just not going to
Yeah.
let it happen, no matter how big you get.
So let's also tell people your, I guess, would be your clinical background,
Yeah,
your
formal
educational
education
background.
background. Yeah.
Yeah, and well, you're a smart dude. I want to, like, and you're starting to talk smart shit, and I want people to understand why they should listen to you.
Okay. So I have an undergraduate degree in exercise science. I spent 2 years after that working in outpatient physical therapy. Decided the 7 to 7, 5 days a week wasn't for me. Um, Went to chiropractic school because I felt like my education was limited as a coach, and I felt like it was mostly from an anatomy and physiology standpoint. And a couple of the chiropractors or a couple of the people in strength conditioning that I look up to happen to be chiropractors. Jordan Shallow and Jordan Junta, they own Prescript, which is like a education company, but they kind of led me to go to that route, not at any fault of their own. I hadn't talked to them before going to chiropractic school, but um, so then I went to chiropractic school, continued to train weightlifting and coach all the way through chiropractic school and then got out, opened my own clinic in a weightlifting gym, and now work as a chiropractor and I work in spine surgery. So I get kind of both sides of healthcare from a spine aspect anyway.
So I guess, what are kind of your, I guess, philosophies or methodologies for like the people that you treat? Are you only using, or I guess typical chiropractic care, or like do you kind of use like that PT background that you have, an exercise science background as well?
That's a, that's actually a really good question, because a lot of people will hear chiropractor and think, okay, well, this guy just adjusts people and then leaves, right?
Right.
But yeah, I use a lot of my strength conditioning background and physical therapy background in practice. Obviously, I still adjust if it's needed and do those kinds of things, but a lot of my clientele base is barbell specific. So it's power lifters, CrossFitters, weightlifters, people that are generally involved in strength conditioning. And then, yeah, it's mostly a rehab based program. Like I'll do the adjusting and soft tissue work and scraping and stem and acupuncture and all the stuff that, can make you feel better kind of in the moment, give you some temporary pain relief.
Hmm.
But then to build on that temporary pain relief, you have to move. So a lot of what I do is like rehab programming for people that are involved in weightlifting, powerlifting, and it's just most of that is supplemental to what they're already doing. Because I almost never will tell someone not to lift if they've hurt their back or if they have a knee or shoulder thing. It's like becoming sedentary is the last thing you want to do after an injury. So most of what I do is, all right, let me see your program and we're going to add some things to it or take away some things that I think may be um, helpful or hurtful in that moment.
Sounds like I need to talk to you after the show. I got
Yeah,
some
with your
things
hip
going
stuff.
on. Yeah, I mean, my hip feels pretty good. I just have a lot of other things, but anyways, that's not what
Yeah,
you're here
this
for.
this can turn into a free eval if you need it
Yeah,
to.
yeah, yeah. Here we go. I
Wouldn't be the
appreciate it.
first
All
time
right.
that's happened.
So another thing I want to talk to you about is like, how would you train? Before we I do want to talk weightlifting because that's both kind of what we're into. But before that, how would you have trained differently now, knowing what you now as a baseball player?
Um, I would have done a lot more lower extremity stuff. I would have done a lot more unilateral stuff, which from a weightlifting perspective isn't necessarily the same. But as a baseball
Hmm.
player, a lot, like very few things that you do on a baseball field are like bilateral symmetrical. So kind of uh, training a bunch of unilateral things and single leg stance things would have been super helpful. I don't necessarily think that you have to train rotation as much as a lot of baseball players do, because
Hmm.
that's what leads to a lot of their low back issues, is because
Hmm.
they're so heavy with rotation training one way.
Hmm.
Um, if they could work more, like, I don't know if you know much about like anatomy trains or like fascial slings, even though they're not like very based in science, to be quite honest. Like the guy that came up with the fascial slings model has since kind of revoked that, but still, it's a good base for like to try to train agonistic muscles together. So, like for example, a Copenhagen plank will train your right adductor and then your left obliques, and those both play a huge role in like pushing off the mount or pushing off your throwing leg and starting rotation. So like kind of knowing what anatomical slings or what movements in the gym would best correlate to throwing or hitting, because most people hit and throw the same side, right? So really you're trying to train the rotation capability of that side, while you should also train the other just to stay somewhat balanced and not
Yep.
be completely one side dependent. But yeah, I would definitely do a lot more of that and just spend a lot more time squatting and doing like power cleans. Not necessarily full cleans, but power cleans for sure.
Yeah, we have, we do some rotational stuff with our rotational athletes. I'm gonna be honest. I think partially we do it to throw them a bone,
For sure.
and like they want to do that. They really feel like it helps or it's gonna help, and their parents think it's gonna help. And at the end of the day, I'm not trying to say it doesn't help at all. We do it. We do it on both sides, as you said, like never doing one side only. But again, like it's a very small part of what we do, and I think part of it, some of it's, like I said, we're throwing them a bone. We're like, hey, you think this is super specific to what you're doing on the mound or at the plate? Let's do it.
No, I definitely agree, and there's definitely a time and place for it. It is a useful exercise, but I think putting it like if you're in the gym 3 days a week, right? Because most sport athletes, real sport athletes, aren't training 5, 6 days a week in the gym like we do as weightlifters.
Yep.
Um, so say you're in the gym 3 days a week for an hour and a half. If you spend 20 minutes of that each time doing rotational activities, after you've just practiced 6 days a week year round doing only rotational activities, it's like, all right, well, now 95% of your general physical preparedness turns into a rotation dominant
Right.
activity. Whereas like you've got 2 hours a week of training that you can use to actually get stronger, faster, more explosive.
Yeah. No, I agree, and I think that a lot of people need to realize that a lot of this rotational power that they're seeing is predominantly neurological, right?
For
Like
sure.
the power that Tiger Woods is putting out, and Mike Trout or whoever, whatever rotational athlete you want to choose. It's like most of that is coming from them practicing that style of creating torque or whatever it is with the muscles that they've built through these more general exercises. It's not necessarily through all this. I mean, you got to think Tiger Woods was hitting the ball a mile when he looked like a freaking string bean. I mean,
Exactly.
he looked tiny and he was still hitting the ball a mile. It didn't matter. He had the leverage for it.
Agreed. And then where some of the longevity aspect will come into play is having more muscle mass to be able to recruit more motor units and produce that same amount of force for a long time. Like if you look at baseball specifically, most of the guys, particularly like steroid era guys, right?
Hmm.
that played a long time, your Barry Bonds, your A-Rods, Ortiz. It's like those guys all started out at, 190-pound teenagers for the most part because they all got drafted out of high school. But they all started at, normal body weights, and then they end up at 230, 240, jacked, and still hit the ball further than everybody. But that motor pattern is ingrained. And like you kind of mentioned earlier in the podcast, as long as you continue to do those things, it doesn't really matter how much muscle mass you gain. Like you're not going to lose the ability to hit those positions.
I mean, look at Juji Mufu. That dude's
Yeah,
freaking
perfect
massive,
example.
and he's so mobile, right? Going back to baseball, dude, that is, I will never understand. So we get, I mean, we train a lot of athletes, and so we deal with a lot of parents, and most of them are awesome to deal with, and even the ones that maybe go this route, it's not that they're not awesome. They need to take time to think through these things. So what I'm getting at is a lot of them say things like, well, we don't want our kid to get too muscular, or like we don't want them to add mass. We just want them to get faster. We just want them to get more stronger. And I literally, and say it's a baseball player. I mean, a lot of them are baseball parents. Okay. I mean, you know how baseball parents can be, right?
Hmm.
I just want to be like, do you understand what steroids do? They literally like do all the things that you don't want your kid to do, and they're called a performance enhancing drug, right? Like they're banned from the sport because they help so much. And you don't want your kid to do the thing that those things do? Like I can't wrap my head around it.
Yeah, it's they're hearing something on the internet or from some, you know, 12U coach that might have played high school ball,
Mm-hmm.
and they're hearing that you need to stay elastic and you need to just be fast and not. I'm like, man, the guys that, like, if you look, I heard a statistic the other day. Now it's on Instagram, so don't take it as gospel. But I
Yeah.
heard the average size of a draft pick was 6'2", 210 pounds. It's like, all right, well, how many of your kids weigh 210 pounds out of high school? Zero of them.
So
Let them build some muscle.
that's the other thing is that they compare. I think what people do is they compare their kid to other kids at the same age or in high school. So, for example, a kid might be a big kid if he's 6'2", 190, right? In high school, that's a big kid.
That's a big kid.
Not in college, not in the MLB, right? You're
No.
skinny. So what you do is they go, "Oh, he's big enough. He's already a big kid. He doesn't need to get any bigger." It's like, and they just can basketball. I think a lot of basketball parents do the same thing. It's like we don't want our kid to get big, right? Basketball players. I hear this the other day. Was, well, basketball players don't really need to be big. And I literally just shared something on our page. I'm a huge Illinois fan. We got a game tomorrow, rocking it, right? So Coach Fletch, Adam Fletcher, he's like our strength and conditioning coach, and he's kind of like a lot of kids say they come to Illinois because he's so good. But he posts like every year. He posts like the freshmen when they get there, and then at the end of the year, and they all gain like 20 pounds of muscle. And it's like that's
Yeah.
the whole point. And it's during the season, which is a whole nother big thing that these kids cannot seem to figure out that you need to train during the season or you're never going
Yeah.
to train, right? But the other thing is like, dude, like the whole thing that Adam Fletcher or whatever college strength coach pretty much has to do to every athlete they get is to make them bigger and stronger. Like every kid they get is talented as shit, but he's just not physically ready for the NBA, right? Like
Sure.
that is his job. So why are you? I just sorry, I just can't figure it out.
Hey, rant, man. I'm I'm on the same page. Like, if all right, look who's the best basketball player in the world for the last 20 years? LeBron James. As much as I'm not a big LeBron fan, been the best
Right?
basketball player for the last 20 years. He's 6'7", 260 pounds and jacked. Like
He's jacked.
like
I
he
don't
can
get
still
it.
shoot. You're like his arms are giant and he can still shoot. He can drive through the paint and he doesn't like if you get bumped going through the paint at 190, it's way different getting pumped going through the paint at 240. Like you can move
Dude,
people
when
at
you're
240.
like if I get too jacked, I mean, and I still can shoot just fine. Like, but I'm just saying, like my arms are so short. Yeah, maybe some shit's gonna start running into each other. But it's like these guys are their arms are so long. It's like you
Yeah,
couldn't even get too jacked for that. So, anyways, sorry I was ranting on that.
I love
You
it
had said like you want to do some. You would recommend some Olympic lifts, mainly like a power clean, right?
for sure.
That's exactly what we do. Um, what, so would you say just general, like basically I want to get like an overarching idea of kind of how you would structure your training. Um, would you just say it would be a lot more like, full body general training? How would you, I guess, structure the training?
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have it be like a bodybuilding split where, all right, today we're only doing legs, today we're only doing back. I think that's a very old school way of thinking. And to be fair, that's honestly how I trained in college because we didn't have a college strength coach. So I trained with some of the football guys that I thought knew what they were doing. Turns out, maybe not so much. I will say I squatted 500 pounds as a shortstop in college, so that's why I could snatch a lot of weight pretty quickly, as I've already had a pretty big strength base. But yeah, I would do, depending on how many days are in the gym, like obviously we would have some type of like speed and agility day, and maybe we start that with a power clean or end that with a power clean since the power clean would be the least explosive movement of a speed and agility day, it would
Hmm.
probably be towards the end. Um, have a general strength day with back squats or deadlifts or whatever primary main movement, and then have a combined upper body day where maybe you add your rotations in with some bench press or overhead press and kind of make that a more all purpose day where you're maybe doing some like over the head med ball throws and your rotations and some slams, and then do your uh, like bench press and slower strength building movements.
Yeah. Okay. And I just kind of, I mean, at the end of the day, what I get out of that is like, hey, I squatted 500 pounds in college and I was a pretty good college baseball player. Like, maybe that was part of the reasons. Like, hey, you had really strong lower body. Like, obviously, I'm sure you're very talented and coordinated. But I think maybe one of the things that probably helped you is that, like, hey, I bet a lot of shortstops in D3 schools are not back squatting
No,
500 pounds, right?
no. And one thing our college coach instilled into us, and he had no part of being in the weight room. He didn't tell us like what to do to train. He just said, "Hey, to be quite honest, whatever school you go to, the people in your conference are the same skill level. Like you're all in the same place. Like, yeah, you might have a standout guy that's just like slipped through the cracks and is just better than all of you, but for the most part, like you're all the same skill level. The people that are going to win are the people that are the strongest and the fastest." Like, and turns out he was right because while I was in college, we had our conference was a good conference. We went to the World Series, like we won conference 3 of the 4 years that we were there. But our team had the conference player of the year all 4 years that I was in school.
Nice.
And then
I mean,
including the World Series year. And then all 4 of those conference player of the years broke individual school records. So it's like, all right, well, the strength conditioning side of, and we were also, the strongest. 3 of us were the strongest. One guy was a dual player, so he was a pitcher and right fielder, and he was just honestly, he was one of the ones that was just a genetic stud. He was just more skilled than everyone and didn't have to work that hard. And you're gonna get those. You're gonna get, a Kevin Durant that can't bench 135 but'll score 50. You're gonna get
right.
those kind of guys.
I think that, so what you were saying, your coach, that's a good point. Like, especially at the D3 level, it's kind of like, hey, you're a D3 player. This is what you are. Like, they've kind of almost been like, I mean, if you were a little bit better, you wouldn't be D3. And then,
Or if the
if
transfer
you,
portal was a thing when we were in school.
yeah, that's a whole nother
That
thing,
that would
right?
have been a big that would have changed that trajectory for a lot of us, I think.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'm generally speaking, obviously, right?
Yeah,
But the
for sure.
point that he's kind of making at is like, you have to differentiate yourself somehow, right? And that was your guys' differentiating factor. It seems like a big part of that was your strength. And that's what, we kind of try to tell our athletes is like, hey, every kid goes to practice, right? Like, you have to go to practice. Like, if you don't go to practice, you're not going to play. Like, so if you all go to the same 3 hour practice or whatever you have after school every day, then why are you all not the exact same ability? Like, yeah, some of that has to do with natural talent, right? Certain things that you've done in the past, but a big part of it's what you're doing outside of practice, right? And in the gym. So I think that's the thing. The other thing you mentioned was like kind of the Kevin Durant's of the world. I think this is a really touchy subject, I think, but a lot of people need to understand it. I think a lot of the best athletes in the world are the best despite their training, not because of their training,
For
right?
sure.
Like they really need to understand that. And the way I kind of describe it is like, you know, I was kind of talking about Max when I had him on the podcast and how I felt like one of the reasons that I got hurt so much was because I had to train so hard to be better, like to get better. Like I just ran into this issue where I felt like I couldn't not train more if I wanted to see any improvement. But then training more also was going to lead to, injuries or, and I was kind of in this toss up, right? Of like, what's the right move? I think the thing is with a lot of these athletes, the professional athletes, is they're so genetically gifted that they don't really have to train that hard. So they can stay
Exactly.
healthy because they're not training that hard, right? Or they can train like an asshole. Like look at LeBron. I mean, he's jacked, but I don't know what if Bosu Ball, whatever the hell he's doing, right, are causing him
Yeah.
to be jacked. I think he's jacked because he's LeBron, you
Yeah.
know. But here's the thing. It's like now here's the thing. You're not LeBron. Joe Blow in my gym. You're not LeBron. So
Yeah.
if you want to close that gap, you're gonna have to do something a little bit different.
Yeah. You're gonna have to be, you know, Brian Scalabrine, who's just a dog and bigger than everybody. So he gets to play
Right.
in the NBA. Well, did get to play in the NBA. You
Yeah,
know,
look at all these like Steven Adams or like these like
yeah,
jacked white guys that are like, they'll make a way for themselves, somehow it's like that's what you're going to have to do.
yeah. And that's honestly same thing in all sports. Like I was having this conversation with Dylan Cooper the other day. Like, man, like that podcast he did with Colby is just so disheartening. And it's like, all right, well, I can train 6 days a week for 10 years, not miss a session, sometimes even 12 sessions a week. Like there was a point where I was training 12 sessions a week. Like you said, I was just
Mhm.
doing anything that I could to get better. And what I thought it was more training. And then he comes in and snatches, I think he did like 160, 186 in his first ever, like first ever national meet. I'm like, all right,
Was that
well,
at 102? Was that at 102?
I think it was 110. I don't think he's ever been 102.
Okay, I thought he was really lean when he first came in. He seemed
I
like
mean,
he
he
was
is,
tiny.
but so I trained with him before nationals in 23 in Colorado. We went to Norix Gym. I trained with
Okay.
him and Morgan, and he's so big. Like he weighed in that day at like 114, and then just
Jeez.
cut 4 kilos the day before the meet. And he just the way he moves a bar is just different than everybody I've ever seen. Like I like I'm not a weak guy. Like a 160 snatch is like towards the top in the US. Like maybe 10 people in the US snatch 160, and he makes 160 look like an empty bar sometimes. I'm just like, all right, this is cheating. Like it doesn't matter how much I train, your genetics won.
Right. He no that episode that Dylan Cooper did with him. I mean, that's the epitome of what I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not trying to take away from somebody like Colby, because I think if he decides that he wants it and he trains hard, I mean, but here's the thing: he's an accountant, right? Like
He
he's got like a
just
full
started.
time.
So he
Okay.
just grad he's only 22.
Yeah.
So
See, that's
he
just
like is
ridiculous.
just starting his job. And I don't know how because he is on the highest level stipend. So he'll make
Mhm.
50 grand a year from that. Um, so I don't know how much I think he's working. Like I think he's starting a full-time job, but I'm not 100% sure how much that'll affect training. And he only trains 4 days a week. So
Right.
if he switches that to like a Tuesday, Thursday, Saturday, Sunday, then he's really only working out 2 days a week during the work week. So he could definitely make it work.
Right. That's kind of my point is like, he's somebody where, he probably will be just like you won't see a drop off if he has to go start working, right? Where I mean, that's basically what happened to me. I mean, other than the injuries, it was like, oh, college is over. Welcome to the real world,
Yeah.
and you got to figure it out. So, but yeah, the other thing is like, Olivia, she came out and said she only trains 4 days a week too, right?
Hmm.
It's like here, okay, there's something to this. I think a lot of people are like talking about, oh, see, Colby trains 4 days a week, Olivia trains 4 days a week. I should train 4 days a week, and that's how you get the best. That's optimal. It's like, see, but what you have to understand is like what I'm talking about is like they can train 4 days a week and get better. I could not train 4 days a week and get better. I couldn't do it.
No.
It would I would have literally got worse, I think.
Yeah, and back to your point earlier, like you have to take into account the training they did before weightlifting. Like
Right.
Olivia was a very high level gymnast that just happened to age out of gymnastics because most people age out, middle of high school from being considered for like an elite team. Um, and so she got into weightlifting. So gymnasts train like I don't know how many people know this, but most high level gymnasts are like homeschooled or do part-time school and then train 6 days a week for 4 to 5 hours a day. It's like, all right, well, if she did that for the first 12 years of her athletic career, it's like, yeah, she might be able to get away with only training 4 days a week because like her 10,000 hours was hit when she was 9 years old.
Right.
So she was you could train 6 days a week over the next 8 years, and she's still going to have trained more in her life. Like, it's just how it
That's a
is.
great point. Yep, she's built a huge base, right? And I think even Colby, I mean, playing football, I mean, I mean, I play basketball. I mean, that's like just
Yeah.
not a good sport for weightlifting. Like, you don't squat, like, you
No,
don't
you
ever
don't
go
hear
into
too
like a
many.
deep position, you know?
Yeah, you don't hear too many basketball players coming into weightlifting and being successful. Although Colby is like that's what he does for his hobby. It's like
Yeah, I saw
weightlifting's
that.
a hobby, but he also like plays basketball 3 or 4 days a week. So,
Well, so
which
did
is
Ilya.
wild to me.
Remember those Ilya videos? Did you ever see those videos where like he's like
Yeah,
playing basketball? Like
at the
they're
Pullman Training Hall.
horrible. They're
Yeah, they're
horrible.
so
I
bad.
mean, it's
It's
like the funniest thing I've ever seen. Like it's like him and a bunch of them other dudes, and they're just like, I mean, they shoot
yeah.
like that. It's funny.
Yeah. It's like watching the
So what?
Dagestanis play basketball. If you've ever seen those like wrestling videos,
Yep.
they like don't dribble. They just kind of run back and forth and all right,
What did
whatever.
I in Tellender's last video? He made that reference to like uh that was it Makachev said in like an interview, send
Two,
your
3 years
kid if you want him.
Dagestan and forget. Yeah,
That's so funny because
that's
that
so
is like
funny.
so fucking true. Like I mean one of our coaches is he was a four-time or he was a wrestler in college, 4-year starter, and then he coaches for us now, Matt, and he's super into like MMA. And like, yeah, I showed him that video, and he's like, "Yeah, dude, that's how these people are, man."
I mean, that's how Russia weightlifting and Bulgarian weightlifting, that's why they ran the world for the 80s and 90s was, all right, well, do you want to eat dinner tonight? Do you want your family to eat dinner tonight? You have to hit this number. I mean, and that's definitely a way that works. It's just never going to work in America. Um,
So you probably have some cool stories. I know you have some cool stories. You got what's like your craziest like weightlifting story that you can think of uh, that you're comfortable telling?
yeah, that's the hard part. Just
Yeah, come on, bro. Nobody
being in
listens
it
to
and
this
being
anyways.
yeah, I mean, but being in it like as long as we have, you tend to know the people that have been all over the place and you hear some things and you hear stories corroborated by other people that maybe not have had communication. But as far as like a personal story, I
Hmm.
made a team for an Olympic qualifier in Rome, the 2020 World Cup. And it was
Yep.
like, right before the world shut down. Like the border from Italy to the US closed 3 days after I left, kind of pushing it close.
Wow.
But watching Lasha snatch 200 in that training hall was one of the most insane things I've seen in person. And it just effortless. Nobody in the training hall like made a big deal out of it. And I was training here. Anton Plesnoy was right in front of me, and then Lasha was like caddy corner to him. So I was literally 12 feet away from someone snatching 200 and like around the highest level international athletes that you can be around for weightlifting. And I was just like, is nobody like concerned about this right now? That's so insane to me. That craziest thing I've seen in person as far as weightlifting goes.
Yeah, that's the one thing. Like, people ask me around the gym at least. They're like, "Why do you like?" I really do want to like try to make one more maybe couple year run in weightlifting, and it's literally just because like I don't know. Like I feel like a lot of my athletes now they didn't know like me back then and like the training that I did and like the different mindset that I was in. So I kind of want them to see that side of me and like because it's hard. I try to be very relatable to our athletes and say like, hey, look, I've done this training. It sucks. You'll get through it. Like but I think it's good to it's good for them to be able to see their coach kind of going through it, or to have gone through it. And I think they can relate. It can give me credibility. So that's partially why I want to do it. And partially it's like, dude, I got some unfinished business. Like I should have at some point won a national championship and, maybe qualified for like a low level international team. And it's like, I would love to still be able to do that. Cause I think, for example, the experience that you had would be really cool.
Yeah, it was definitely well worth how hard training is. Weightlifting training is miserable. Like
Mm-hmm.
I compare it to most people don't get this experience, but I work with USA Diving, and it's similar to USA Gymnastics where these kids are all homeschooled. They train from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. 5 days a week, and then 8 to noon on Saturdays. And the amount of training that they do is so unbelievable. And I still think training to be an elite level weightlifter is harder. Like because it's all pain. Like there's some technique, but that technique has to happen at weights that are painful. Like getting better
Right.
at clean and jerk is painful, but it's fun and it's rewarding, and I love training it. But people don't understand that. Like sometimes you just have to grind for, you know, a year to make a couple kilo PR on each lift. Like this is my 10th year in weightlifting, and I just hit a meet competition PR for the first time in 3 years. I haven't hit a clean and jerk PR in 3 years. So it's like it's a lot of
Hey,
work
I'm
that I've
longer
done
than
in
that. I
three
don't want to
years.
hear about it.
Uh, you'll
I'm going
you'll
on
get
much
back
longer.
you'll get back to 95% within like 6 months, but then
Yeah,
getting to
95%. Yeah, that's the
yeah
problem.
and then getting back
So,
to 102% might take another year.
right, exactly. Yep, that's what people don't realize. But you made a good point. So, basically, weightlifting is one of the only sports where all of the training is physically demanding. Basically, like you can say I'm going to do technique work today, which one technique work is kind of dumb. Like when in the way that people say it, they're like, "Oh, I'm gonna like have like 60 kilos on the bar, and I'm gonna do technique work." And it's like, well, your technique is gonna change a lot when you put 140 on. So you
For
might
sure.
want to try doing some technique work with weights closer to that percentage. So, like you said, you can't really fake it. You can't like for basketball, right? I could just say, "Hey, I am beat to shit today. I'm gonna go just shoot a ball." Right? I'm just going to work on my shot. I'm going to work on my form. I don't need to run a lot. I don't need to jump a lot. I'm just going to shoot free throws or whatever. Because here's the thing, the implement doesn't change. The
Mhm.
basketball weighs the same every time you shoot it, right? Where weightlifting, the implement changes. So you have to practice with like these higher lifts or these higher weights, right?
hmm Yeah. The weight of the baseball doesn't change, the weight of the bat doesn't change, the height of the rim doesn't change. It's all the same. Weightlifting is so vastly different that like people really don't grasp the level of training that you have to be a good weightlifter, which is why it's not an incredibly popular sport. Now, at the Olympics, there was 10,000 people and every session that I went to was sold out. But you
That's
go to the
cool.
basketball game and it's 50,000 people sold out and people watching it. Like we watched a Team USA versus Serbia game
Mm-hmm.
at a bar in Paris, and everybody was rooting against the USA. And then there's, me, Zach, Nate, and who else was with us that day? Me, Zach, Nate, and a guy named JP. So all of us weigh 220 or more, big white guys rooting for the USA in this crowd of like normal people in France. It was funny. But yeah, like you said, the basketball training or sport training in general, you can take it easy some days. Weightlifting training, the best idea to take it easy is take it off.
Yeah, no shit. Just take it off, right?
Yeah.
Active recovery and this and that. It's just like, dude, take a mental day. Like, cause that's
Yeah.
the
Go.
thing is like, if you're doing something, you're mentally taxing yourself. You're like, oh, I'm at least gonna like it uses willpower essentially to like, go do that.
Yeah.
What's like the future goals you have? Like, what do you got? What are you thinking?
I,
You're not done
because
yet, are
I'm
you?
because I'm weightlifting 33, which is ancient nowadays. Um, it's like me and Daniel Dodd were the two oldest people that competed as like
You
not
don't look
masters
old. He
only
looks
athletes.
old.
I'll tell him that. I'll clip it.
No,
Um,
he looks old.
yeah. I
He's
shaved today
hairy.
to try to look a couple years younger.
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
yeah.
but I really, because I'm so close to 170, like I really want to snatch 170 and clean 200. Clean and jerk, I honestly could really care less about, but I've cleaned 195 and I feel like that's annoyingly close to 200 to not make a push to clean it. Like at this point, I know I'm not beating Colby. I know I'm not beating Medina or Ryan Sester for that matter. I think Sester's going down to 98 and
Oh
I'm not
wow.
cutting because I hate it so much. Um, so I'm gonna stay at 105, 106, and just compete at 110. And I don't care if it's in competition or training or whatever. I just want to snatch 170 and clean 200. And then I'll still always train weightlifting. Like I love snatching. I
Mhm.
probably won't do another clean when I'm done because, like I said, clean and jerk hurts so bad to get better at.
Same.
But I'll continue to back squat and continue to snatch probably as long as I can, Phil Sabatini style.
Yeah, that dude's like, I mean, he's old and he's so jacked. Like that's like my future goal. Like look like Phil Sabatini,
Yeah,
the rest of my life.
he's all of us like short white guys heroes. Like
Yeah, he's
he's small, jacked, 43, and I think he just snatched 140, did some snatch deadlifts at like 220. It's like he's a superhero, man. I don't understand how he is what he is. He's got like three kids too, so he's like three kids, runs a gym, and still trains, 4 or 5 days a week. Talk about being a
that's
jacked dad.
crazy. Yeah, that's what I want to be, a jack dad. So
Same.
we kind of alluded to this before we were on the podcast. I was going to ask you this question. At the end of every episode, we ask, "What is your unfair advantage?" So it's kind of a play on the fact that obviously life isn't fair, right? Like Colby has his unfair advantages, right? Kevin Durant has his unfair advantages, but those are literally like, I mean, they actually are kind of unfair, right? This is more like, hey, what's something, whether you have it like inherently or something you've developed over time, it could be a mental trait, it could be a physical trait. What is a thing that you think that kind of separates you and makes you like as successful as you've been?
I think really understanding anatomy and physiology and injuries and injury prevention and really being able to navigate those things on my own has been very helpful because while I still deal with injuries, like everybody gets hurt in every sport, especially weightlifting, like knee pain, back pain, all of those things. But being able to accurately assess, like, hey, is this an injury or is this like, am I just sore today? Um, and being able to appropriately rehab it on my own really makes a major difference in being able to continue to train year round. I know a lot of people will get an injury, see two or three, four providers that don't really work, that don't understand weightlifting. It's really hard to find a doctor that understands weightlifting to the level that, you know, elite weightlifters need them to. I think that that is by far my biggest advantage in being able to continue to do this for a decade.
Nice, dude. Well, this was awesome. Definitely come out to the gym
For sure.
sometime. Let
We'll
me
set
know
one
when you
up.
got
And
some free time and
yeah,
maybe you
or
have
if
a
you ever
spare
want to
bedroom.
come, if you ever need to come
Yeah,
train on the Paris stuff, I got a same as you. I got a spare bedroom upstairs. Welcome to stay as long as you need to.
sick, dude. I appreciate it. We'll do this again soon.
For sure. I appreciate you.
Thanks, man.